Cool.
Yeah. This better not suck.
Checkity check. Hey, what's up, world? Now, this is sort of a continuation of my last video, but I realized that one of the points that I was trying to make in that video, it sort of was scattered all over the place. So, in order to fully understand the system that I'm going to be presenting in this video, and in order to fully understand why I'm even presenting this new system, I have to quickly summarize the point that I was trying to make in my previous video. So in my previous video, I discussed Plato's 5 degenerating regimes. And one of the points that I was trying to make in that video is why these regimes degenerate, or why these regimes change. And the reason why these regimes change is in order to correct the mistakes, or at least one of the reasons why these regimes change, is to correct the problems that society begins to have with the previous regime, or with the prevailing regime. Specifically, these regimes change in order to correct the corruption and abuse of power that inevitably begins to occur in the ruling classes. And they attempt to correct this corruption and abuse of power by opening up the ruling classes to other citizens. So as these regimes progress, they begin to open up access to the ruling classes, or they begin to grant power to more and more citizens, until eventually it becomes a democracy. So what happens is, for very specific reasons, societies begin as aristocracies. Societies will most definitely not begin as a democracy. And as they age, the aristocratic class becomes corrupt and begins to lose their grip on power. Now, in order to maintain their grip on power, and for other reasons discussed in my previous video, the aristocratic class, or the aristocracy, opens up the ruling class to other citizens, and the aristocracy becomes a timocracy. And a timocracy is basically a government in which power is held by landowners, or landowners also get access to the social power. Then after some time, a similar thing begins to happen in the timocracy. The ruling class becomes corrupt, the masses become restless and demand change. And in order to maintain some social cohesion or social stability, the timocracy opens up the ruling class positions to even more citizens, and the timocracy becomes an oligarchy, which means that now you only need to be rich in order to obtain some political power. And of course, there's other reasons why this change occurs, which I discuss in my previous video. Then, once again, for reasons stated in my previous video, and for basically the same reasons already mentioned, after some time, these oligarchies become more and more corrupt. The division between the oligarchical class and the poor grows, making it harder to enter the oligarchical class. And this causes societies to become restless, and it forces the oligarchical classes to once again cede power to even more of the citizens. And this eventually turns the oligarchy into a democracy, where basically all of the citizens have some sort of political power, or at least the illusion of political power. Then these democracies become tyrannies. Now, I don't really need to discuss why these democracies become tyrannies in this video, because that doesn't really have anything to do with this new form of government that I thought of. Because this new form of government, I'm hoping, will replace the democracy without us having to go through with the tyranny. Now, in my previous video, I sort of talked about how possibly, or maybe it's possible, that we need a necessary tyrant to bring about this system, the system that I'm going to be currently discussing in this video. But I also believe that it's possible that we can bring about this system that I'm going to be discussing in this video through a democratic process. Like, maybe we don't need a tyrant to do this, and regardless, a tyrant itself would have to come about through a democratic process. Like, a tyrant can't just, appear in the street and say, yeah, I have all the political power. Tyrants actually get voted into becoming tyrants. Sort of like what happened to Julius Caesar, and also what happened to Hitler. Now, returning back to the previous regimes, a point that needs to be made. Throughout this entire process, throughout these regime changes, what ends up happening is the original aristocratic class, or maybe not the original aristocratic class, but segments of those aristocratic classes never really lose power. For the most part, they manage to maintain power as the regimes progress. And by the time the democracies roll around, this elite, which was really the same elite from the original aristocracies, they've obtained enough power to be able to control the democracy. And maybe it's not even the original elite from the first regime. Maybe it's not that much of a grand conspiracy. But what ends up happening is through these transitions, those who were really in power during the oligarchy, when the transition occurs to the democracy, those in the oligarchy have already obtained enough power to control the democracy for the most part. And this is one of the reasons why, in 2014, there was a study by a political scientist, Martin Gillens of Princeton, and another political scientist, Benjamin Page of Northwestern University, that concluded that the United States is really more of an oligarchy. So you had these two very prestigious political scientists who, around 2014, had concluded that the United States is really more of an oligarchy, that the lower classes, they don't really have representation. It's more of an illusion. So, obviously, these prestigious political scientists must be conspiracy theorists, right? And what's hilarious is, since that study was conducted, there have been, articles written trying to counter this study and trying to say, oh no, the United States isn't an oligarchy, even though it very obviously is. Anyway, the point of all of that summarization, the point that I'm trying to make is that while coming up with this new system of government, I had to think of two things. The first thing that I had to think about was how to prevent corruption. And the second thing that I had to think about was how to break up the corruption that already existed. How to break the hold on power that the previous regimes had established. How to really open up the ruling class to the common person. So here's a general idea of what I've come up with. And it mostly applies to the federal government, but a similar thing can be done, or a similar thing can be established at a state level. Now, before I even get into my framework, I have to say that, of course, this system would require a more thorough Bill of Rights and a different constitution that actually limits the power of government, specifically starting with a new preamble. We most definitely need a constitution with a much better preamble. The current preamble basically gives the current government unlimited power, if you really understand the preamble to the current constitution. But this video isn't necessarily about those things. This video is not about a Bill of Rights or those other things. I'm just trying to put those ideas out there. This video is more about a general framework of how I think Congress, the Senate, and presidency might be better selected and better organized in order to guarantee representation government transparency, and in order to severely reduce the possibility of corruption. And I also think that this system will create a much better society. I think that this system will create a society that people want to be part of and participate in. And, this will create a society that doesn't make people want to become social outcasts who are more interested in, antisocial behaviors than they are social behaviors. I think that this system will re-energize society. And that's actually a big thing that occurs during these regime changes that I had mentioned in my previous video, is that these regime changes also occur to boost social morale, boost the social morale, because people begin to lose hope. They become hopeless in these other regimes. They feel like life is kind of stuck on auto. These aristocracies, the very first regimes, they become very automated, and your life ends up becoming very preset out for you, and that becomes depressing. So I believe that this new system can do a lot to end that automation, to end that kind of depression in society. While researching our current government and reading works from various 17th and 18th century political philosophers, I couldn't help but notice the importance of a jury trial, or of being judged by one's peers, as opposed to some representative of the state. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought to myself, why don't we choose our political representatives in a similar fashion? Of course, not exactly how juries are selected, because that is mostly dependent on lawyers and such. But I'm talking about this random selection process, the way that we're chosen for jury duty, how we're kind of just randomly selected, and then we have to come in for screening or something like that. Now, maybe we can skip the screening process and we can just directly elect them into office, or maybe we can have this random selection process be what decides who runs for election. Why can't half of Congress be made up of randomly selected citizens? Of course, these randomly selected citizens would, have to not have a felony criminal record or anything like that. And of course, these randomly selected citizens, it would have to be voluntary. They would have to agree to serve. It's not like, hey, nope, we picked you, now you have to come and serve. There should be some sort of choice in this process. Or like I said, instead of being directly appointed through a random selection process, people can be randomly selected to be candidates to be voted on. Now, I think that the direct appointment process is better, because those with money will eventually have an unfair advantage when it comes to getting their name known to the general public. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I definitely think it's better. Now, I know that some might say, actually I'm sure that most people are going to say, that most people aren't qualified. I know people are going to be like, what are you, crazy? Just randomly selecting people for office simply because they don't have a criminal record and giving them this political power? And they probably think that such an idea is crazy. I don't think that it's that crazy, because I think about people like AOC, and I think about people like Nancy Pelosi, and I'm like, are these people really qualified? I don't think that they are. And I mean, there's other politicians who have made other statements. If you just listen to these people talk, you'll realize that these people aren't qualified at all. So really, this random selection process, it's probably going to be better. I mean, oftentimes, I've dealt with freaking homeless people on the street. I'm like, damn, man, this homeless person here would make a better politician than 90% of the politicians that we currently have. So really, I really do prefer this random selection process. And I think that what we can do to kind of counteract this concern that people have, we can make people better qualified. We can make the average person better qualified by simply improving our education system. If we make our education system less irrelevant, and make it so that part of the educational curriculum involves leadership classes and classes on politics and ethics, then really more and more people would be qualified for this random selection process. And what we can do to offset this, because so far I've only really discussed the Congress, so half of Congress can be randomly selected, the other half can be elected on, I guess, and then for the Senate, we can have the entire Senate elected on. Or maybe 2/3 of the Senate is voted on, and then 1/3 is randomly selected. And for the presidential position, what we can do is maybe have more than one president. Maybe have 2 or 3 presidents, and 2 of them can be elected or voted on, and 1 of them can be randomly selected. Or maybe we can do a vice versa of that. And 2 of them can be randomly selected, and 1 of them can be voted on. And to really offset things, to really prevent corruption, what I think would really prevent corruption is somewhere in the legislative process, somewhere in the lawmaking process, there should be a referendum. There should be some sort of referendum in this process where the general population gets to vote on the laws being passed. And not just the general population, 5% of the general population can't vote on something, and then a majority of that 5% then passes the law. I think that the referendum process should have at least 70% of the adult population or 70% of the voting age population voting. I mean, that just makes sense. If you don't have a law that's going to actually get the people's attention, then guess what? It's not going to get passed. And I think that this will prevent frivolous laws from being passed. And, what we can do is the process for the budget, because really I think that this system, the main point of the government should be budgetary concerns. They should be concerned with the budgets. They can be concerned with how the states are violating rights or upholding rights. And they can be concerned with other things. I don't think that the federal government should be a system of just constantly making laws. One of the anti-federalists mentioned this in their paper, that the federal government is really a system for just perpetual law creation. And they were really against this. They were really against having the federal government constantly active every year creating laws. What I believe will help a lot is I believe that we should limit the pay for state servants, we should limit the pay for our political servants to being no more than 40% above the poverty line. So political servants, they shouldn't be having these large salaries. People shouldn't want to be public servants because it pays good. I think that another thing that we should do is that this next system of government, it needs to open up federal lands to responsible homesteaders. It needs to be able to open up federal lands that are kind of just being wasted away and mostly becoming fire hazards during the fire season. The federal government, or this new system, it should open up these lands to responsible homesteaders. People who don't want to be part of the system, people who don't want to be part of this rat race, and who, just want to go and be part of nature and be left alone. Responsibly, of course, so be left alone responsibly. I think that opening up those federal lands, or at least some federal lands, to these kinds of people will do a lot to make people love the society that they live in, to show that this is a just society, that this isn't some tyrannical society that forces you to participate in it. The society, or the system, should definitely make room for people who don't want to be part of it. Anyway, I'm just going to go ahead and end my rant right here. Please contribute to the conversation by letting me know your own thoughts. Do you think this is a good idea? Do you think it's a bad idea? Maybe you have a better idea of your own. Maybe you just want to let me know that I'm an asshole. Whatever it is, let me know it in the comment section.